One strange thing about the Naruto series is that the characters don't really use armor. And hold your horses, I know what you're thinking, of course they wear armor. We see armor all the time in the story, but that's not what I mean. Yes, several characters wear suits of armor that are very reminiscent of samurai, such as Madara, Hashirama, Tobirama, most of the characters in the Warring States period, to be honest. The samurai that we see in Naruto Shippuden in the Land of Iron, and other characters as well that I'm not going to be mentioning here because it's a lot of them. But there is no magical suit of armor in Naruto, and that's kind of odd. You would think that your fantastical ninja story that involves all sorts of magical abilities, because let's be real, chakra and ninjutsu is magic, they don't have magical suits of armor in Naruto, which is weird. This is a staple of many fantasy series, especially shonens, because if you think about it, those characters, you know, Madara is wearing armor, but I don't know how powerful the armor he wears is gonna be against attacks that are the size of the Leaf Village when Hashirama was throwing the 1,000-armed Buddha statue against him. What's the armor gonna do? Nothing really, it's just a piece of metal. And we see plenty of characters that are able to completely destroy it with no difficulty. For the average ninja that fights with kunais and uses the clone jutsu and the substitution jutsu as their go-to, of course a suit of armor will be helpful, but when Madara and Hashirama are fighting against each other in the Valley of the End, I don't think their suits of armor are gonna be very useful, to be honest. Of course, there are armor-like jutsu, such as Gaara's sand armor, that even though it has armor in the name, it's not a suit of armor. It's just a coat of sand that protects Gaara and is just layered around his body. Gaara looks exactly the same with or without the sand armor, so it's not a suit of armor. You get what I mean, right? There's also the Raikage lightning amp that not only amps the Raikage's speed and strength, but it also amps his durability. We see he tanks a Chidori from Sasuke. Granted, he gets a little bit hurt by the Chidori, but it's not nearly as bad as, you know, getting killed by it. And of course, the third Raikage's durability amp is much higher than the fourth Raikage's, but anyway, they do have the same type of armor-like ability. We also have the Susanoo, which is the closest thing I would say we have to a suit of armor, because we do have this giant hulking humanoid thing made out of chakra that wears armor and protects the user. However, it's not a suit of magical armor wrapped around the user itself. The avatar is much bigger than the Susanoo user. The user usually stays on the Susanoo's head when it's the perfect Susanoo, and on the Susanoo's base when it's not the perfect Susanoo. There's also the ribcage variation, which is much more armor-sized, but it's not a suit of armor. It's like a big shield around the user. Many people like the idea of having a Susanoo armor around the user's body, which would be interesting to see. There's a lot of fan art of Sasuke having that purple armor around him, but it just never happens. We also have plenty of other types of jutsus and abilities that resemble the function of a suit of armor, like a Jinchuriki cloak, such as Naruto's Kurama cloak when he was fighting against Sasuke in part 1, and the cloak tanked the fireball. But when I am referring to armor here, I'm talking about something like the Senseiya series, where the characters have magical suits of armor that protect them and they have special abilities. Obviously, protective gear is important in the Naruto-verse. If you don't know, beneath the Jonin vests of every village, they wear protective armor. It's made out of wood, but it's something. You can mostly see that when Kiba stabs himself with his own kunai in the fight against Sakon, and when he's removing the kunai, you can see the plaque of wood that protects the ninja beneath their clothes. And obviously, when Kishimoto was writing Naruto, he definitely thought about types of armor that were made out of chakra and that he could have incorporated into the characters, but he never chose to do so. When you're playing around with so many magical powers, this possibility definitely comes into your mind, and it's something not very hard to imagine, characters producing armor with their chakra. It would be very easy to create a jutsu that just do that, and maybe even a clan that specializes into doing so. Obviously, this would make sense with the world of Naruto, because characters are fighting all the time, and getting jutsus that will protect you against attacks is a big advantage. I don't have to explain that. So why doesn't Kishimoto do that? Why no armor? Well, first we have to take a look at the conventional armor that the characters use in the Naruto series. An important thing to note here is that the only two characters in Naruto Part 1 that use suits of armor are Hashirama and Tobirama when they're revived by Orochimaru and they fight against Sarutobi. They are the only two characters that wear that type of gear. When we hop back to Naruto Shippuden, then most of the times when we see suits of armor, they are worn by characters from the Warring States period or close to it. Madara is the prime example. His armor is iconic. It looks great and it's different from most of the ninjas we see around. It makes him stand out a lot, which is a good thing for building up a nice villain. Another prime example is the Hiruzen Danzo flashback when we witness the second Hokage going to his death to protect the Leaf Ninjas. All the ninjas in that squad wore armor, that samurai-like armor, including Tobirama, of course. During the Hashirama Madara flashbacks, every single major shinobi wears armor, but the present ninjas don't do that. They wear the ninja vests. The glaring exception, of course, are the samurai, which are a completely different faction, and I've made an entire video talking about them. I'm not a big fan of the samurai. I don't think they have a place in the story of Naruto, but it's important to note that they are essentially a completely different faction. They are not ninjas, obviously, and so they wear armor, which isn't magical, it's just this more protective suit of metal armor. The important thing is that Kishimoto is obviously trying to say something with the armor characters use and the type of protective gear they choose to fight with. The Warring States period was a period of constant war, enemies attacking you from all sides, huge gargantuan battles against other clans, a lot of death and destruction, and of course, a lot of open field battles. I joked before that Madara and Hashirama wearing armor will probably not do anything for them, but for the average ninja, a suit of armor can be the difference between life and death. Armor can deflect shurikens and kunais and minor ninjutsu, and when you live in a battlefield 24/7 essentially, being protected against those things is one of your main priorities. Now, if you come from a completely realistic perspective, it makes absolutely no sense that nobody wears helmets, because helmets are the most important part of a suit of armor. You can just take a look at modern soldiers. The most important part that they protect is their head with helmets. That's the first thing they get when it comes to protective gear, but of course, in Naruto, characters don't wear helmets because we need to see their faces, and it's better for the character design. One of the reasons why the samurai look a little bit weird is because they all have helmets, and even though it's realistic, I mean, it doesn't really make them very good. But naturally, characters that live in a constant state of war will want more armor, and that's what they do. They protect their bodies from attacks from all directions wearing suits of armor, and of course, there are several variations. We see variations between Madara's, Hashirama's, and Tobirama's suits of armor. Different clans will also have different variations of armor and all that good stuff. When the Warring States period comes to an end and the villages are formed, we see that the ninjas that form the armies of the villages don't really lose that custom quickly, because of course, in the flashback of Tobirama dying, they are wearing armor as well. Sarutobi is wearing armor, Danzo's wearing armor, everybody's wearing armor in that squad, and that's because they used to do so during the Warring States period. That flashback happened in the first Great Ninja War, which wasn't very long after the villages were formed, so they were really trying to figure things out and see how this entire village system would work. But then when the system itself begins to set in, and ninjas become more accustomed to their new ways of life and how they have to fight, they transition to a different type of protective gear, the ninja vests. Of course, they also have protective armor underneath them, but they're not nearly as covering, and they're much more gear for urban environments and stealth. Ninjas are no longer fighting in the battlefield all the time, for the most part at least. They're no longer part of entire armies or battalions. They're fighting in smaller squads, doing missions much more akin to assassination and espionage. So of course, suits of armor are not going to be the most effective way to do those missions. Everybody knows, everyone that plays D&D at least knows, that heavy armor gives you disadvantage in stealth checks. And ninjas, they have to be silent a lot of the time. Of course, there are always going to be war in this world, as per Hashirama saying, so we see that in the second Great Ninja War, the war where Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade fight against Hanzo, that they wear vests, the shinobi vests that they are used to now, even though arguably a suit of armor would be more protective and efficient during a war. It's better for you to use what you have instead of just gearing production towards a very old type of thing. Besides, looking at Nagato's flashback, we get a feeling that the wars were much more urban this time, time, and therefore the suits of armor wouldn't be nearly as effective as open field wars that we had in the Warring States period. After all, the Ring Village was completely ravaged by war. It was the battlefield of the Second and the Third Great Ninja Wars. We can even see an interesting parallel to the real world, where ancient knights used to wear metal armor that surrounded their entire body, and now modern day soldiers wear protective armor vests and helmets. And that's pretty much it. That's essentially what happened to the ninjas. As times became more modern, they opted for a more convenient option. And this is the big divide in between characters that wear armor and characters that just wear the vests or don't wear anything at all. This was very much deliberate. Kishimoto wants to set up this precedent that nowadays ninjas are much more established. They are an organized society. You know, all the nations have a system put in place where ninjas receive missions and they go on missions in usually 4-man squads. They have the vests and the headbands, which is something much more shinobi-like than suits of armor, and those who wore suits of armor are people from a bygone age, people that don't really exist anymore. The stereotypical image of a ninja is a guy in a black suit with just a slit for the eyes but no armor really. Maybe a vambrace or something like that, but not a big hulking suit of armor. The best character that shows us the transition is Hiruzen, because he used to wear a suit of armor just like Madara, Hashirama, Tobirama and all that. But then when he fights against Orochimaru, he wears a little bit of armor but not a lot. Only a helmet and a vambrace, obviously stating that times have changed. And he only wears those things because he is an old guy and he remembers back in the day how things used to be, because nowadays practically nobody's wearing vambraces and helmets. And obviously a lot of those choices come to character design as well, but we see that Hiruzen is a ninja that's old, that was from an older era, but is also transitioning into this new era. Not having completely lost his roots, but still adapting to things going on right now. The first depiction of a Hokage that was completely devoid of armor was Minato. He was essentially the new age shinobi. He wore the classic Jonin vest and his Hokage cloak, and nothing else for armor, man. He's just there. He symbolizes this new age that was unfortunately cut short because of the incident of the Nine Tails. We see the 3 Sannin, who were a generation older than Hiruzen, they've already lost their armor and they don't use it anymore, even when Tsunade becomes the Hokage and all that. So this is the explanation as to why characters don't even wear regular armor anymore. What about characters not wearing or using magical armor at all? It also has to do with the ninja way and the inspirations Kishimoto was using when writing Naruto. He didn't want the Naruto characters to feel like knights or even samurai. He wanted them to feel like shinobi. Naturally, this was reinforced by them not using normal armor, but if they had jutsus that resembled armor, even though it was a samurai armor, this would kind of contradict the story and the themes of the series. Take Senseiya, for example. The show is known as the Knights of the Zodiac for a reason. They are knights because they wear magical suits of armor. There are also plenty of fantasy novels and other shonen anime that treat their magical armor guys as knights, and of course, this is not what Kishimoto wanted. He didn't want his ninjas to feel like samurai or knights. He just wanted them to feel like shinobis. But then you may say, well, but Tobirama and Hashirama, they had armor in part 1. What gives? Well, of course, it's because of the divide between times. They were exceptions. They stood out because of their character design wearing armor, but adding a magical suit of armor would have been an extra step that would take the characters further from this ninja feeling that they had in the series. And of course, the way the characters look has nothing to do with whether or not they're shinobis, because people even say that in the end of the Naruto series, the ninjas lost their way and the series kind of lost itself because they're no longer ninjas, they're just blowing things up with a lot of power. But no, being a ninja is much more than that. It boils down to deceiving the opponent, using the best strategy possible to win the battle or win the situation you're in. And thematically, a shinobi is the one who withstands, the one who endures. But of course, Naruto needs a feel to it. The story needs to be about ninjas, and even though the themes are very much aligned, if the characters don't look like ninjas, things will feel a little bit weird. Some people had problems with Jubito and Jubidara, for instance, because they didn't look like ninjas, and I'm fine with that to a certain extent, because they were supposed to feel like demigods and almost monsters in the universe, especially Jubito. He was supposed to be like a Frankenstein's monster. Dude was weird because of so much power that he got. But if there was a clan that used a particular jutsu that gave them a magical suit of armor, then things could have felt a little bit off. And of course, it's very easy to overdo things, such as this concept of magical armor, for example. A lot of people ask for the small Susanoo-like armor that people like to draw fan art for, but there's all types of things and you could go nuts. Take Shikamaru, for example. What's stopping him from creating a shadow armor around himself with his shadow? Or Hashirama, or in any wood-style user really, they could create suits of wood armor around their bodies, which would look cool. But then, if you can use wood-style armor, why can't you just use armor from any elemental transformation? You see, if you want to, you can create a suit of armor out of any type of jutsu in the story. I mean, if you can get jutsu, for example, there's an armor that's just surrounding you, it's an illusion, and if you touch it, you're gonna be under a genjutsu of some sort. You can do all types of things, but Kishimoto chose not to because of the thematic and artistic value of the series. He didn't want his story to feel like a samurai or a knight's story. In his other story, Samurai 8, which flopped hard, the characters wear magical suits of armor because they are samurai, and it fits with the theme and the looks of the story. Now, maybe you could argue that having a character that's kind of an exception and that had a suit of armor would be something interesting to see, and I would agree with you. I don't think that having a couple of jutsus that create suits of armor, especially if they're hard jutsus that only a couple of characters would acquire, would destroy the series by any means. But even if you come from that perspective, there are also other issues about, well, having this in the story. The first one being that creating a magical suit of armor, depending on the parameters to achieve the jutsu, you could essentially break the universe in terms of power scaling. Why? If it's so easy, why doesn't everybody use it? Kind of thing. It's just like the substitution jutsu, which is the most underused jutsu, even though it's the literally most OP ability in the entire universe. You could create something like that. But even if you do something very specific that only one character, for instance, could use, there is still another problem with magical suits of armor. They are extremely difficult and time-consuming in terms of drawing. If you take a look at Hashirama, Tobirama, or Madara's armor, you can see that they are not the most difficult thing to draw. Of course, they're not simple, you know, a noob couldn't really do them properly, but for Kishimoto, they're not hard. They don't have that many moving pieces, and they are simple enough. However, if you keep on adding pieces to a suit of armor, and you would probably have to do that in order to make a satisfying magical suit of armor, it gets progressively more difficult to draw it. Kishimoto is a great artist, but his forte isn't really the character and the drawing itself. He's much better at just drawing the fight scenes and how the battle flows. I mean, I'm not saying his drawings are ugly, far from it, but there are guys that are much better than him and that can do these things faster. Take a look at Berserk, for example. Guts' suit of armor is insane, but Kishimoto wouldn't really be able to do that on a regular basis. I mean, he has to write and draw 20 pages per week, which isn't easy. So if you had a character with a magical suit of armor, which you would have to include a lot of moving parts and difficult design elements, and especially if this character gets a decent amount of screen time, this would be difficult. Naruto is not a manga with very intricate character design. The Naruto characters have a simple design that can convey a lot of emotion and the situation of the character in just a few details. And with those simple designs, Kishimoto is able to create great characters. But take a look at the Akatsuki, for example. They all essentially have the same clothing. What changes is their face and maybe their hands and stuff, but it's not a lot that changes in the Akatsuki, and yet the Akatsuki character design's amazing all around. And we can see simplifications of character design all around Naruto. When the time skip happens, you can see how simpler the character designs got. If you compare Part 1 Naruto to Shippuden Naruto, his clothing was much more complex in Part 1, and you can go through every single major character, they got a major design change, and this is probably going to hold. There were also things things Kishimoto did on purpose so that his life drawing Naruto would be easier. For instance, do you know why Naruto's Sage Mode cloak was only used in the pain fight? It's because it was difficult to draw. It looked amazing. The red and black cloak was one of the best things we've ever seen Naruto wearing, but he only wears for a brief time because Naruto is literally the main character. He has the most page time, and Kishimoto has to draw him essentially every page of the manga, and the cloak added a lot of time to his drawings. We can also see in an armored thing why Kishimoto didn't want to have characters with magical armor. The Susanoo, when first introduced, of course, the later stage has a suit of armor, which is the most complex stage of the Susanoo drawing, the final stage where we see Itachi using it for the first time in the Itachi versus Sasuke fight. Sasuke awakens his Susanoo, and we only see the armored Susanoo a couple of times. For a brief second in the fight against Kakashi, and then a few glimpses during the work. We can even see that when Madara shows up and he starts to use a billion Susanoos with his wood clones, their designs are much simpler. They don't have armor, it's just a body of chakra essentially. Because drawing a suit of armor for all of them in the same panel for a lot of pages would have been too time consuming. Of course, then we have the perfect Susanoo, which gives us this massive creature with armor, but then the perfect Susanoo is not nearly as much in the story as other things, such as Naruto wearing a cape, for instance, if he were to keep the Sage Mode cape forever. When Naruto acquires KCM2, he also gets a cape, and what do you know? He doesn't use that cape for long. Even when he has KCM2, he kind of reverts back to KCM1, or what people like to call 1.5, when he is fighting against Jubito, and also when he gets 6th Sage Mode, he loses the cape again. These decisions are made for time constraints, essentially. Kishimoto had to focus his priorities, and we also know that Kishimoto liked to draw things that would be good for the anime adaptation. He worked very closely with Studios Pierrot for the anime to go well and for the adaptation to be smooth. If all of a sudden characters decided to show up with intricate magical armor, it would be very hard for the studio to animate that in a timely manner, and they would probably have to use 3D, you know, CGI, which nobody really likes all that much, especially in a 2D anime, and an anime like Naruto, which wasn't exactly the peak of animation quality. I bet that 3D wouldn't be very good. I mean, it is jarring when characters wear suits of armor that are 3D, but you have to understand they are very hard to animate, and I'm glad Naruto never took that route. The 3D animations in Naruto are subtle and well hidden, and when they use the 3D, it's usually well incorporated into the scene. Animating something like the Susanoo, for example, is not as difficult because the Susanoo is not the character, it's just a gargantuan humanoid around the character, which is going to move way less than the character himself. Most of the Susanoo animation is just the Susanoo stopped, not moving at all, and just the chakra slash flames of the Susanoo rising up. They don't have to do much for that. But a character in a suit of armor, that would have been much more complicated. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Seriously, if you follow my channel and you're not subscribed, do me this favor, it's 2 seconds, and it helps me a lot. Also, like this video if you enjoy it, and watch this other video right here for more Naruto content. Thank you so much for watching.